So one of the senior Sanders aides that we had regularly on this show, especially when he was in town, is David Sirota. Sirota has become something of like a villain, bizarrely. Flashpoint, that's a good way of saying it. For his role in the Sanders campaign, he's always been more outspoken. He was the person who found those old C-SPAN clips of Joe Biden talking about cutting Social Security. He ran the Burn Notice newsletter, and sort of famously, at least in Bernie circles during the campaign, he was the staffer that was punished for pushing out Zephyr Teachout's column about corruption and Joe Biden, and he was sort of, sidelined because of that. So he now has a newsletter on Substack, which, by the way, you all should sign up for because David is an extraordinarily smart and astute political observer, and you want to catch all of his insights there, so sign up for that. And the newsletter that he just released does a deep dive into what he think went wrong on the Bernie Sanders campaign. Something we've been talking about here, because if you want to learn from the past, you should not do what the neoliberal establishment does and just blame everybody else. You should actually take a hard look at the things that could have gone differently, learn from them, and move forward, which David is trying to do. So he prefaces in his newsletter the amount of unbelievable respect he has for Senator Sanders. And knowing David on a personal level, I can promise you that that is all totally true and genuine and authentic. And also how much respect he has for what Senator Sanders has accomplished. But then he goes into making the argument that they should have gone harder against Joe Biden, which I just think is manifestly true. I mean, it's politics 101. If you have an opponent, you have to make a contrast. You have to give people a reason to vote for your person over that person. You have to do it before it's already too late. No negative ads before Super Tuesday is just, it's political malpractice, frankly. And so David goes in and talks about that. But even that level of just sort of mild criticism has been completely trashed online. Another former senior Sanders advisor actually went to Sam Stein, another reporter, and said, what's clear from this sniping and solidified by today's newsletter is that for David, this campaign was always about David. He's finally getting the attention he so badly wants.
It's hilarious.
So nasty.
It is nasty. And, I really, seriously, please go sign up for David's newsletter because it's one of the rarest things in politics. Honesty. Yeah. It was an honest retrospective of what happened, what went wrong, how did David personally see Joe Biden? He was like, I don't think he deserves any affinity from Bernie Sanders, given his legislative record, and about how hard David was willing to go. And he talks more about what the culture and the moments at the campaign were critical of. And I just think from the very beginning, as I think he addresses, he was villainized and vilified because he dared to just post clips of Biden. They'd be like, his toxicity of literally just tweeting a clip of Biden saying that we should go to war in Iraq or defending the invasion of the war in Iraq, saying we should support President Bush. These are, they're in the historical record.
Right.
It's not toxic to highlight somebody's thing. And again, David understands how politics actually works. Nina Turner understands how politics actually works. Kyle Kalinske, you actually understand how politics works, which is Nina said on our show today, which is that power gives up nothing unless there is a demand.
Right.
And that from a Frederick Douglass quote. This is what David, all he was trying to do was trying to highlight a contrast. And what ended up happening is we had the weakest Democratic primary in modern history.
So soft.
Especially compared to Barack Obama.
Yeah.
Especially compared to 2004 and 2000 and the one before that and the one before that. I mean, there are clips, 92, of Jerry Brown talking about Hillary Clinton's Whitewater investigation to Bill Clinton's face, and they get into a shouting match. That was in 1992, right?
And this is actually, so I think the, should have gone harder on Biden ground is relatively well-trod, and frankly, something we were saying throughout the campaign, right? We kept, maybe this is the debate where he finally does it. The point that David makes in this newsletter that I think is really important and worth continuing to think about is he says, look, I think there are 3 reasons why that contrast wasn't made. Number 1, Bernie is a principled lawmaker, but he's not actually a scorched earth politician, and he never has been, and he never would be. It's just not who he is. He actually likes and respects Biden, and that created an additional hurdle to him being able to go after him. But the third point is the one that I think is really important, which is he says the Democratic Party has manufactured a culture that creates conventional wisdom and perception that Any efforts to contrast opponents' records from the left in a primary is negative and therefore destructive. That culture is the structural factor that lasts way beyond this campaign, and it is a huge problem. And I think that is exactly right. Because there is so much justifiable contempt for Donald Trump and fear that he could get reelected, any sort of contrast that was at all sharp or clear was seen not as just the normal rough and tumble of a political campaign and yeah, we got to hash it out in the primary and steal, sharp and steal and all of that. It was, oh my God, if you say those things, you're going to help Donald Trump. When in fact, the exact opposite is the case. It did not serve the interests of the Democratic primary electorate that really does want to defeat Donald Trump to not have Joe Biden tested in this primary really at all.
Right.
The many inconsistencies in his statements, his past record. I mean, we talked to the Trump campaign today. They're like, we're going to be all over him on trade. We're going to be all over him on China. We're going to be all over him on Hunter Biden. These were all issues that should have been hashed out during the primary so that voters could decide for themselves whether, with that long list of liabilities, he really was the electable candidate that he ran as.
And look, I said that here. I was like, look, this is going to happen. I'm like, I know these people.
We talked to them
during the show. I'm like,
this is what they're going to pick up on.
Be it. It's very easy to see. I think, look, at this point, we're preaching to the choir at a certain point because the rising audience has always been ahead of the game.
Yeah, that's right.
And I want to draw a parallel.
But that structural factor is really important moving forward.
I want to draw a parallel to that because it's not just the left. And this is actually how all anti-establishment things. So whenever I talk about economics and I criticize that, one of the central criticisms that I will get and that other people like me on the right will get is all you're doing is validating a left-wing critique of the economy. Right. And you're like, well, sometimes the left-wing critique of the economy is, correct.
Yeah.
And by lying to yourself, like whenever they say, you're contradicting the message that this is the best economy, since we've ever seen and that the Trump economy and all that. And I'm like, that's not the issue. The issue is that there's underlying systemic rot. And I don't really care if that undercuts that message or not, because I believe that. And I think metrics believe that to be a true empirical fact. And I don't care if it's politically inconvenient. And if others can pick up on that and say, look, even a right winger is saying the same thing that we are. There are always going to be cynical actors in politics, but that can't abscond you from telling the truth.
Right.
That's the most important thing, is if you believe it to be true, if you believe these contrasts to be important for the well-being of people's lives, that if in the short term, if cynical actors are going to pick up on that, that's okay. That's honestly, they will always be there and they'll be doing it to anybody else and they'll be using some other fool.
Well, it's just stupid to think that, if we don't say it during the Democratic primary, then the Trump campaign's not going to say it. I mean, it's just patently stupid. Mm-hmm. But what actually did matter is this relentless drumbeat that the Bernie Sanders campaign was negative and toxic and out of bounds and all these things. That actually did add up to an important public perception that shaped the race. And it's not something that the left can allow to persist. We can't buy into that narrative, because if you're never allowed to make a contrast with the centrists and the establishment and the corporatists in the party, you're never going to be able to win. So I think that structural factor is what David's saying. We have to really, really push back on at this point, because otherwise it does. And look, the reality is primaries really, really matter. These differences within these parties are night and day, with massive consequences, not just for who holds power in D.C., but who has a decent life in this country, who this country is actually run for. And so if you don't have, if you don't make those contrasts clear and you're not willing to make those contrasts clear during the primary, you're doing a massive disservice.
You are doing a disservice. And, there's two schools of thought. They're like, well, you know what, you guys need to bow now because the stakes are high. You need to just go over Biden, and we'll talk about this later. The other school of thought is by not bowing when the stakes are high, you actually show that you're willing to stand up for it, even during crunch time. And that, in the long run, gives you far more power and credibility to your position than anything ever could, because people are always going to be able to look back at Bernie Sanders, at AOC, and everybody else and say, look, you guys folded. And, Bernie, you went in there and you endorsed him in the video. You gave an opportunity to ask a question. You didn't ask him about Medicare for all. It's like, what happened here, man? And you're always going to be able to support that in terms of our hypocrisy. And so for the people who don't do that, they're always going to have credibility in what they speak. And that's worth, in the long run, more than anything.
Their whole bet, their whole political philosophy and how they go about achieving power is assuming that the left has no other choice and that the left will never walk away, that they'll always, they may complain and they may go on Twitter and they may, they may yell and shout about it or organize a protest or whatever, but they're ultimately going to fall in line because they have no other choice. And so we can spend all our time over here with these like moderates and corporatists and centrists whose, by the way, interests happen to align with our corporate donors. So it's like a win-win situation over in this camp. We can focus all our energy and center our party around these people because these ones have no choice.
Right.
And as long as you always routinely fall in line when the chips are down, they're going to continue to take for granted. And look, maybe that's the choice that you have to make. Maybe there isn't any other choice. Maybe you decide that, okay, the stakes are too high, but we have to be clear-eyed about that is the reality of the power dynamic that we're facing right now.
I think that's very important.
Tomorrow on Rising, Daily Beast's Hannah Trudeau updates us on the Biden Veep stakes.
And the Washington Post Jeffrey Steiny details the economic outlook over the next few months. As always, please like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you guys tomorrow.
Click the bell, guys. See y'all tomorrow.